What if I told you there are vegetables sitting in my garden right now that I planted once, years ago, and they keep coming back every single spring without me lifting a finger? No buying new seeds, no transplanting, no starting over from scratch. They just show up like clockwork and start producing food again. When I first heard about perennial vegetables close to 15 years ago, I was skeptical. I spent my whole gardening life treating everything as an annual, ripping plants out at the end of each season and starting fresh the following year. It seemed like that was just how vegetable gardening worked. But the science behind perennial food plants is genuinely fascinating. These are species that store energy in their root systems over winter, going dormant above ground while keeping their underground infrastructure alive and ready to fuel rapid regrowth the moment soil temperatures rise in spring. Some of them actually get more productive with each passing year as their root systems expand and mature. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 6 vegetables that grow back every year without replanting, explain the biology behind why each one persists, and give you specific varieties and growing details so you can start building a permanent food garden of your own. Stick around for the bonus tip at the end because it is a technique for establishing perennial vegetables that dramatically improves their first-year survival, and I wish I had known it from the start. The idea of planting something once and harvesting it for years, sometimes decades, changes the economics and the effort level of gardening completely. These are not exotic or hard-to-find plants. Most of them are available at any good garden centre or seed catalogue, and they grow across a wide range of climates. What makes them special is that once they are established, they require a fraction of the annual maintenance that crops like tomatoes or peppers demand. I have been growing all 6 of these in my own garden for years now, and they have become the backbone of my earliest spring harvests. Let us get into the first one. The first one I want to talk about is asparagus, and there is a fascinating reason why it is the crown jewel of perennial vegetables. A single asparagus planting can produce harvestable spears for 20 to 30 years. That is not a typo. 30 years from one planting. The variety Mary Washington is a classic, but the all-male hybrid Jersey Knight is my top recommendation because it puts all of its energy into spear production rather than diverting resources into making seeds. Asparagus grows in USDA zones 3 through 8 and prefers full sun with well-drained soil. The science behind its persistence is remarkable. Asparagus develops a massive underground crown, which is a dense cluster of thick storage roots that can eventually span 2 to 3 feet across. Each fall, the plant sends all of the sugars produced by its ferny top growth down into this crown, building a larger energy reserve year after year. When spring arrives and soil temperatures hit about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the crown uses that stored energy to push spears upward at an astonishing rate, sometimes 2 inches per day under ideal conditions. Plant crowns, which are the root clusters you buy at the garden centre, 6 to 8 inches deep and 18 inches apart in a trench, amended with plenty of compost. Here is the part that requires patience and discipline. Do not harvest any spears for the first 2 years. I know that is difficult. You will see beautiful spears coming up, and every instinct will tell you to cut them. But if you harvest too early, you deplete the crown before it has built enough reserves to sustain long-term production. Let those spears grow into their full ferny foliage for 2 complete seasons. In year 3, harvest lightly for about 4 weeks. By year 4 and beyond, you can harvest for the full 6 to 8 week spring season. Once my asparagus bed hit its stride around year 5, it became the most productive and lowest maintenance section of my entire garden. Next up is rhubarb, and this one really surprised me with how vigorous and long-lived it is. Rhubarb is a true perennial that can produce thick, tart stalks for 15 to 20 years from a single planting. The variety Victoria is widely available and reliable, but if you can find Canada Red, the stalks have a deeper colour and slightly sweeter flavour. Rhubarb thrives in zones 3 through 8 and actually requires a cold dormancy period to produce well, which means it is perfect for northern gardeners, but struggles in the deep south where winters are too mild. The plant stores energy in a thick, fleshy rhizome that sits just below the soil surface and expands each year, sending up increasingly more stalks as it matures. Plant divisions or crowns in early spring, about 2 inches deep, in rich, well-amended soil with full sun. Space plants 3 feet apart because mature rhubarb gets large with leaves spanning 2 to 3 feet across. Like asparagus, skip the first year of harvesting entirely to let the plant build reserves. In year 2, harvest lightly. By year 3, you can pull stalks freely from spring through early summer. The harvesting technique matters too. Do not cut rhubarb stalks with a knife because the remaining stub can rot and introduce disease to the crown. Instead, grasp the stalk at its base and twist it gently while pulling outward. It will snap cleanly from the crown with a satisfying pop. One important note: rhubarb leaves are toxic due to high concentrations of oxalic acid, so always discard the leaves and eat only the stalks. My rhubarb patch is going on its 9th year now and produces more than my family can use, which makes it a wonderful crop for sharing with neighbours. Number 3 on our list is walking onions, also called Egyptian walking onions, and here is why they deserve a spot. These are one of the most unusual and self-sustaining vegetables you can grow. Walking onions produce small bulbils, which are clusters of tiny onion bulbs at the tops of their stalks instead of flowers. As the stalk grows tall and heavy, it bends over under the weight of the bulbils, and those little bulbs take root where they touch the ground, effectively planting the next generation. That is why they are called walking onions. They literally walk across your garden over the years. They grow in zones 3 through 9 and are essentially indestructible once established. You can harvest the green shoots like scallions in early spring, use the underground bulbs like shallots, or pick the top bulbils for pickling or planting elsewhere. The flavour is stronger and more complex than standard green onions, with a sharp, garlicky bite that mellows when cooked. Plant bulbils or divisions about 1 inch deep and 6 inches apart in fall or early spring. Within 2 to 3 years, a handful of starter bulbs will multiply into a self-sustaining colony that provides an almost endless supply of onions without any intervention from you. I planted 6 bulbils 8 years ago and now have a patch of several dozen plants that I harvest from regularly without ever worrying about the population declining. If you're finding this helpful, do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. I put out new videos every week breaking down the science behind growing better food at home. It is free, and it means you will not miss the next one. All right, let us keep going. The 4th pick is sorrel, and let me tell you why I think this one is criminally underrated. Sorrel is a leafy perennial green with a bright, tangy, lemony flavour that adds a completely unique dimension to salads, soups, and sauces. The variety, largely French, is the best for culinary use and produces generous arrow-shaped leaves from early spring through late fall. Sorrel grows in zones 3 through 9 and handles partial shade beautifully, which makes it perfect for spots where sun-loving annuals would struggle. The science behind its persistence is that sorrel develops a deep, woody taproot that survives winter easily and pushes new leaf growth the moment the soil begins warming in spring. In my garden, sorrel is one of the very first things to emerge each year, often weeks before I've even started planting my annual crops. That early spring harvest is incredibly valuable when the garden is otherwise empty. Direct sow seeds are 1/4 inch deep and 8 inches apart, or transplant nursery starts in spring. Sorrel requires almost no maintenance once established. I cut leaves regularly, which actually promotes more vigorous growth, and I remove the flower stalks when they appear in summer because allowing the plant to go to seed reduces leaf production and can result in unwanted seedlings popping up everywhere. The tangy flavour comes from oxalic acid, the same compound found in rhubarb leaves, though in sorrel leaves the concentration is much lower and perfectly safe to eat in normal quantities. My sorrel patch is going on its 7th year and shows absolutely no signs of declining. If anything, it gets better each season. The 5th one I want to talk about is horseradish, and there is a fascinating reason why this crop is nearly impossible to kill. Horseradish produces a thick, pungent root that is used as a condiment, and once established, it will come back year after year with an almost aggressive persistence. The common variety sold at most garden centres does well across zones 3 through 9. The plant spreads through underground root fragments, and even a small piece of root left in the soil after harvest will regenerate into a full plant. This is both a strength and a warning. Plant horseradish somewhere you're comfortable with it staying permanently, or contain it in a raised bed or large container, because it will spread. The pungent heat of horseradish comes from compounds called isothiocyanates, which are released when the root cells are damaged, like when you grate it. These compounds are the plant's chemical defense against soil-dwelling pests and herbivores, and they are what make freshly grated horseradish so much more intense than the jarred version from the store. Plant root cuttings about 2 inches deep at a 45-degree angle in rich, loose soil. Harvest roots in late fall after the first frost, which triggers the plant to concentrate flavour compounds in the root. Leave a few root pieces in the ground and the plant will regenerate the following spring without any help from you. I have a horseradish patch that I planted once about 6 years ago, and every fall it gives me more root than I know what to do with. I make my own prepared horseradish and give jars of it away as gifts during the holidays. Next up is the 6th and final vegetable on our list, and it is Jerusalem artichokes, also known as sunchokes. These are a type of sunflower that produces edible tubers underground instead of relying on seeds for reproduction. The tubers have a crisp, nutty flavour similar to water chestnuts and can be eaten raw in salads, roasted or pureed into soups. Jerusalem artichokes grow in zones 3 through 9 and reach 6 to 10 feet tall, producing cheerful yellow flowers in late summer that attract pollinators. The plant stores energy in its tubers over winter, and any tuber left in the ground after harvest will sprout the following spring, making the colony self-perpetuating. Like horseradish, this is a crop that requires some containment strategy because it spreads enthusiastically. Plant tubers about 4 inches deep and 12 to 18 inches apart in a dedicated bed or an area bordered by a mowed path. Harvest tubers after the tops die back in fall, digging carefully with a garden fork. The nutritional profile of sunchokes is interesting because they contain inulin rather than starch as their primary storage carbohydrate, which means they have a lower glycemic impact than potatoes. One word of caution, though, inulin can cause digestive discomfort in some people if eaten in large quantities, so start with small servings and see how your system handles it. I harvest several pounds of sunchokes each November and always leave a handful of tubers in the ground to start the next season. The plants have come back every single year for the past 5 years without me doing anything beyond basic harvesting. Now, this is something I stumbled onto about 4 years into growing perennials, and it completely changed my success rate with establishing new plantings. The technique is heavy mulching with aged wood chips during the first 2 winters. Most perennial vegetables die in their first or second winter, not because of the cold itself, but because of freeze-thaw cycles that heave the crown or roots out of the ground, exposing them to desiccation and direct frost. A 4 to 6 inch layer of aged wood chips over the root zone acts as thermal insulation, buffering those temperature swings and keeping the soil at a more stable temperature throughout winter. The mulch also retains moisture in the root zone, which is critical because winter desiccation from cold, dry wind kills more perennial roots than actual freezing does. I lost my first asparagus planting and my first rhubarb crown to winter heaving before I figured this out. Once I started mulching heavily in late fall, my establishment rate went to nearly 100%. Pull the mulch back slightly in early spring to let the soil warm and the new shoots emerge, then push it back around the plants once growth is underway to suppress weeds and retain moisture through the growing season. It is such a simple step, but it makes the difference between a perennial crop that thrives for decades and one that dies before it ever gets going. That is everything I have for you today. Gardening is one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realize there is to discover. And perennial vegetables are proof that sometimes the smartest approach is to plant once and let nature do the rest. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next video.